1 or 2 accurate predictions would be taken as fascinating, but a few more would be alarming and raise serious questions. People's curiosity would be overtaken by fear when they hear what they don't want to hear, especially about matters that are beyond their control. A person who knows more than he should would be taken as a threat, and it becomes ridiculously unimaginable when the knowledge comes from the tongue of an animal instead. As a junior journalist in a local news station where reporters fight for good stories to lead the headline, I was often given the most irrelevant topics just to fill up the gap between segment transitions during live broadcasts. I was in no position to compete with the other writers and researchers, and all the reports I did were things like a new flavor of a popular milkshake, a newly opened shop, results of a dog show, and everything else of that level. Nobody really listened nor cared to my stories. However, it all suddenly changed when I was asked to interview a man who claimed that his crow could talk. Including myself, nobody would have expected that a mere filler report that was often ignored would turn out to be the most important and controversial coverage at the time. An old man from the boondocks claimed that he found a peculiar crow one night at his farm. Ironically, it was perched on the arm of the scarecrow that was meant to scare it away. He initially thought that he was just drunk and hearing things when the crow started talking. But then, the morning came, and the bird kept on chattering. Crows are known to be very intelligent birds that could mimic different sounds, including the voice of a human, and so I thought that what he had was nothing special. However, this case was not that of a trained animal with adorable quirks. Despite its coarse voice, I was dumbfounded when the crow spoke in complete sentences. At first, I said hello to it in an attempt to get a short response. Like a parrot that is triggered by a cue, I was expecting the crow to say a simple hi or hello, but instead of a few words, it replied with a complete sentence and even asked where I was from. A crow was undeniably engaging in a conversation with me. I was astounded and wasn't able to answer quickly, and so it asked if I felt okay while staring directly at me. I was out of words, and so were the people back in the studio. It was a live broadcast at the time, and everybody witnessed the bird literally talking like a person. After an awkward pause, I answered the crow's inquiry. The bird far surpassed my expectations and remarkably excelled in communication skills. We talked about random things until my time was up. The crow introduced himself as Karl, and he spoke like a well-mannered adult with a lot of things to share. Even though my brief segment was over that day, the discussion about the talking crow lingered around the studio until the end of the broadcast. Even the headlines about sports and recent events were easily overwhelmed. This astonishing oddity spread like a wildfire. The other stations flocked over the old man's farm on the following day to witness Karl's communication skills for themselves. I was asked to get back there again and again to know more about the bird, and I willingly complied, despite the long travel, since it was a great opportunity for me to get the limelight. Aside from having my chance to finally shine, I was also personally intrigued. They asked him about various things, and his response were that of a very experienced traveler. He described the places he had seen, and he also shared his struggles during difficult weather. Aside from hearing an avian species point of view for the first time, the crow's abundant knowledge about human interest was also quite fascinating. During his interviews, he would ask questions just as much as he would answer theirs. As a species who was driven to survive, he questioned humanity's interest in trivial concerns and the time we spent with it. From the places he had been and the different communities he had seen, he had witnessed people's greed and strong tendency to self-destruct. But whenever the crow would speak of these matters, they would shift the discussion to other things. Most reporters who went to see him were only interested in his ability to talk and not his negative observations about human behavior. They only wanted a story about a freak of nature which the viewers would like to see. Within a short period of time, the crow became the hottest topic everywhere. Even foreign journalists flew over in order to meet him. The farm was eventually crowded by the media, and Karl was treated like a freak show. As he rose in popularity, he was bound to come across those who did not believe in him. There were a few times when the old farmer was harassed when they suspected him for faking the crow's ability to speak. Even though his remarkable skill was proven many times, there were others who simply refused to believe in it. There were also instances when Kyle flew away in the middle of an interview when he was already too exhausted to talk. I for one am guilty about this matter, since I went there almost every week when he became a regular subject for my daily segment. They even extended my time on air because of him. In order not to cause him any fatigue, I allowed him to talk about whatever topic he wanted to discuss. It was then when I discovered another peculiarity about Kyle, and it was something far more controversial than his ability to talk. I was well aware about his high level of intelligence and knowledge about various things, but that was not all that he had. Apparently, the talking crow also knew about certain events before they even happened. Kyle had the ability to see the future. Due to my frequent visits, Kyle and I eventually ran out of things to talk about. Unlike the other journalist who came to him, I allowed him to speak freely about his curiosities towards humans. I tried my best to explain to him about a person's countless concerns about their daily lives and how fragile human lives could be. I also explained how unpredictable our actions might be if we were driven by our emotions to an extent that we would give up our own lives to save the ones we love. I told him how helpless and desperate a human could be in certain situations where an avian being like him could easily flee. For the first time, I was able to silence Kyle. He stared at me without saying a single word for a brief moment, as if he was trying to process the things that I said. In the middle of that silence, my attention was caught by the dark clouds building up and told him that it was about to rain. Following what I said, he told me something that was quite perplexing to say the least. The talking crow suddenly spoke about an upcoming storm, and he said that a boat would be sunk by the heavy waves along with its passengers. It seemed as if he decided to express his sympathy towards humans by telling them about this alarming information after explaining to him how helpless we could be in certain situations. However, the dark clouds didn't seem like it would develop into a storm. I was not sure if he was able to detect something I couldn't due to his sharper senses as a bird. However, this still wouldn't explain how he was able to know about a ship sinking. We were hundreds of miles from any body of water. I asked him how he knew about these things, but his response didn't make any sense at all. He told me that he saw it just as clear as he was seeing me. After the interview, I called someone at the studio to ask him about the weather report, and I was told that there was no reading of an upcoming storm at the time. 2 days after my last visit to the Talking Crow, a storm actually came. Chills crawled down my spine when I saw the news. Just what Kyle had said. A cruise ship capsized when it was hit by the strong waves. 21 passengers sunk along with the ship, and 10 others were still missing. Some of the viewers remembered the broadcast when the crow made this statement out of nowhere, and callers flooded the phone lines of our studio when they realized that he was right. I was profoundly astounded by the fact that a talking bird was able to predict a tragedy 2 days before it happened, and we would have been able to save the lives of the passengers if we had listened to him. But then again, nobody at the time would have thought that it would actually happen. When the sky cleared, I immediately went back to the farm and asked Kyle how he knew about it. Unfortunately, my questions remained unanswered when he gave me the same response prior to the incident. He told me that he saw the tragedy in the same way that he was seeing the current time. I couldn't fathom how he was describing it. It seemed as if it was something normal to him. It sounded like his knowledge about any events was not bound to the present time alone. Kyle not only could talk unlike any other crows, but he could also predict the future. I tried to keep my composure as I was talking to him, but just like any other person, I grew worried and curious about what would happen next. Thankfully, the talking crow willingly answered my question. Kyle spoke about a chaos on the main highway. There would be a huge pileup that would claim a number of lives. I asked him when it would happen, and he said that this tragedy would occur when the moon was almost full. Based on the moon phases, it meant that the incident would happen on the following week. The other reporters also caught up to me and asked the same thing. Everyone has been on high alert since then. However, the talking crow garnered more negative attention since he made the prediction. There were more people who labeled him as a hoax, and they said that the incident of the cruise ship that sunk was just a coincidence. Frankly, I would have agreed with them if I wasn't the one who made the interview. There was nothing sensible about a talking crow to begin with. In the following week, the highway was just as busy as it normally would be, despite Karl's warning. Only a few people believed the prediction of a bird, and I couldn't blame them. I was hoping that he was wrong. Unfortunately, his prediction came true once again, and the tragedy was caused by a single man. A bank robber brashly placed across the road while he was being chased by the police, and he collided with a van which also crashed into the vehicle next to it. Everything happened so fast. The first crash started a chain of collisions. Those who abruptly hit their brakes in an attempt to avoid the pile had also caused the following vehicles to crash against each other. In the end, the tragedy was not prevented. 9 vehicles were wrecked in the pileup, along with 11 casualties. The unfortunate incident left such a gruesome scene, and those who managed to survive were deeply traumatized by the horrific sight. Some individuals were thrown out of their cars due to the impact of the crash, and their bodies were repeatedly ran over by the others. Torn limbs and crushed body parts were all over the road that was painted red with their blood. Just like before, I returned to the farm to see the talking crow and listen to what he had to say. I told him about the pileup on the highway. I said that I wanted to prevent the tragedy, but I could not convince the people to believe in me. However, his response was quite disheartening. He told me that these happenings were bound to happen, and there was nothing I could do to change their fate. I said to Karl that it was in the nature of a human to try his best regardless of the outcome. I was fully determined to do everything I could in order to stop the next event. But the scale of the next tragedy in this prediction was so grand that I choked as my hands jittered. Karl said that the land would be covered by fire as far as the eyes could see. It would destroy the homes of the animals and severely affect those people surrounding it. A few weeks after his third prediction, the vast woods in the north were in flames. Thousands of acres were caught by a wildfire, and the community around the area had suffered the waves of burning heat and buffeted by smoke. The inhabitants of the woods were beyond help. Those who were unable to escape the fire were burned to death. Despite all my efforts and those who believed in the prediction, there was nothing we could do to stop the incident from happening. After this series of tragedies, more people had decided to believe the predictions of Karl. Out of fear and desperation, a group of fanatics emerged, while others began to demonize the existence of the talking crow. Bold actions were made to follow his next predictions, and the believers practically relied on his words for guidance. I kept on visiting the farm along with the other reporters from different networks. His predictions were published in different media platforms, and they were translated in different languages all over the world. Some people probably didn't even know that Karl was a talking bird. Representatives from the government had also decided to join the fray. They wanted to capture Karl and use his ability in their favor. The drastic increase of the crowd had given an insurmountable pressure to the crow. He talked much less since then, and he was often not at the farm. People began to search for him in the places nearby, and some individuals who caught a different crow were claiming that it was Karl. 2 months after his last appearance, the pretenders were proven fake when the real one finally showed up at the farm again. Due to the incentives he was receiving in every interview, the old man immediately informed the media about Karl's arrival. We all rallied to get there first, since we knew that the talking crow would leave again if there were too many people crowding him. I didn't want to put any pressure on Karl, but just like any other concerned individual, I wanted to know the next tragedy so we could prevent it from happening if possible. Luckily, I was one of the few people who arrived first. While the talking crow was still in the mood to hang around, I asked him where he had been just to engage into a conversation. However, Karl could read right through me. He knew that I came there to ask about his next prediction. The talking crow spoke about a virus that would spread across the seas and claim thousands of lives. Once again, the scale of this tragedy was beyond me. My knees buckled and I fell on the floor as I lost all hope. Tears fell across my face as the other reporters who also heard the prediction frantically called others to inform them about the next incident. One of them asked Karl when it would happen. As more people arrived, the talking crow flew away without answering his question. Just as he said, there was a global outbreak of a virus that quickly spread within different nations. Hospitals were packed to the brim, and there was nothing they could do to save the patients who were already in poor condition. While some were able to survive it, the others died within a few days. In a matter of weeks, thousands of people all over the world had fallen victim to the virus. Once it was inside the system of the patient, the virus would target the weakest organ and drastically worsen its condition. As a result, the poor victims with prior medical issues had died due to organ failure. Laws were enforced in order to stop the virus from spreading even further. Along with these changes, companies and other establishments were unable to sustain production due to the lack of human resources, and they were forced to shut down. The peak of the virus's severe effect lasted for more than 2 years, until a vaccine was finally made and distributed. While others were able to regain their livelihood, some had fallen completely and driven to poverty. Due to this, I was unable to visit the farm for a long time. When I was finally allowed to travel and get back to work, I immediately told the station that I had to see the talking crow again. Unfortunately, the old farmer told me that the talking crow rarely come to him since the last interview. I was assigned to cover other stories, but I still dropped by the farm quite frequently and walked around the area in hopes of seeing Karl again. After a couple of months since I returned to work, my efforts paid off when I saw him in the woods near the farm. Perhaps it was due to the number of times that I talked to him in the past that I was able to recognize him, even though I haven't seen him for quite a while. I slowly approached him when I saw him roosted on a branch of a tree all by himself. I began to tell him everything that happened, and I just kept on talking even though he was not responding. After a while, I was starting to think that the crow was not Karl, and I was making a fool of myself talking to a bird. But as I was about to walk away, he finally spoke. Karl offered his condolences to those who lost their loved ones, since I also lost my mother to the virus. Even though I was trying the best I could to hold back, I couldn't help but ask him if it could get any worse than what we already had. Sadly, he said yes. And then he openly shared the next upcoming tragedy. Karl spoke about a famine that would kill millions of people. He spoke about fishes coming out of the water to die on the surface, and the birds would fall from the skies. He said that the trees would rot and be covered in blood. He said that an endless war would occur, and the old beings would appear to rule over humans until there are none left. The sky would not see the light of day again, and the world as we know it would crumble. Never in his predictions had I ever felt an absolute terror until that point. Despite my strong resolve, there are limits to what a mere human could endure. As he was looking down at me from the branch of the tree he was roosted on, tears flowed across my face, while an unimaginable fear enshrouded my entire body and down to my very core. I fell on my knees and was completely petrified. What he described to me was significantly worse than my nightmares. Not a single soul in the world would be strong enough to witness such a scene. Anything that happened before then was dwarfed by what was to come. Right there and then, I felt that death would even be a better option than seeing the horror unfold. What Karl had told me was not a mere tragedy at all. With sincerity in his hoarse voice, the talking crow described the end of days.